Welcome everybody to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. Today, for our campfire episode, we're going to be covering most iconic rifles. If you haven't already watched our most iconic handguns video from 2 weeks ago, go give that a watch. We were going to do them all in one video, but it would have been kind of long, and yeah, so we broke it into two segments. But we each picked two, so obviously there are going to be more iconic rifles out there in the world than just what we're covering in this video.
Yes, this is not the most iconic rifle.
Yeah,
it is just iconic rifles.
Yeah, and because there are some that we could cover in here that obviously would fit on this list, but there's just
to
limit ourselves.
Many.
Yeah, to limit ourselves, we've limited it to two per person. So we'll start with Dad, one each down the line, and then back to Dad, and then down. If you haven't watched our channel much too, I know we get a lot of new people watching our channel. So Fort, Jake, Joe, we're brothers. This is Dad, Brian, and
the old guy,
the old guy, the boomer, the boomer, the FUD. That's the other term that gets used.
The boomer. That's my turn.
Well, I remember one of our early campfires. Somebody made the comment, that brother on the left or whatever side looks a lot older than you guys. Porter. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, that's Dad. He's not a brother, but we are the Pierce Brothers, and you'll notice too, we cover, we just get so many new people. We have a lot of different opinions on things. We all have our different interests, and
so Joe's always wrong.
Our videos can vary greatly. You get, because we each do our own individual videos for the channel, and then we do our group videos. But anyways, that's us. Dad, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. You know, it's hard not to think of, when you talk about iconic guns, to not think of the Mauser Model 98. Nobody really knows how many there were made, or have been made, or continue to be made, but we know that it's way over 100 million guns. 100 million. Let that thing sink in a minute, because most sporting guns, when they reach the million gun mark, that's like really a big deal. That's like impressive. And there's a lot of great sporting guns that never made it that far, but are still great sporting guns. But 100 million plus, and it's way over 100 million that have been made. And again, nobody knows, because they've been made virtually in every modernized country around the world. They build them in all different levels of quality and so forth. But of course, Paul Mauser is the one that designed it. He had designed many designs up until that point, but when he finally got the Mauser 98, that was almost perfection. There was the design did have a couple of shortcomings, but we'll talk about those in a minute. But in military, this sample I just threw in is an early post-World War II FN, for Big National built gun. But the military guns, of course, most of those were more sloppily made. The way the bolt fit in the raceway and so forth, they just had more play. But man, those guns were so rugged, so durable, so reliable. You fill them in mud and shake them off, rinse them out a little bit, and just keep running with them. And they just virtually never break. I remember back in the 70s, I was visiting a gunsmith friend of mine, and he was building a custom rifle for a guy, and he built a barrel. Somehow his roomer picked up a little bit of a burr on it, and as he cut the chamber, it left a circular cut inside the chamber. So when he crew fired it, boom, it expanded out. Of course, that case didn't want to come out, so of course he took it and forced the bolt open, and went to tear the case out, and the big claw extractors are so commonly known on these actions, literally ripped the rim off that 270 case. And it's like, turn bolt action rifles that have a rotating extractor, I don't know of one that can do that. They ultimately fail and pop over the rim of the case, but that just shows the rugged, strong nature of that. These guns were fully machined, the frames were forgings, they were they had, of course, twin forward locking lugs, 90-degree bolt lift, and they had a third locking lug, and actually it wasn't technically a locking lug, it was more of a safety lug right here on the back of the bolt. if something catastrophic happened with the two forward ones, this acted as a third lug. In a previous video, quite a few months ago, I talked about two friends of mine that owned a sporting goods store, and they went out shooting, and one had a custom Mauser 98, and this was an old gun, or an old action built on a custom barrel, custom stock, very high end, very nice gun. And they were shooting both Remington ammunition. One was shooting a 308, the other was shooting a 270. The one that had the custom Mauser 270 accidentally pulled a 308 cartridge out of his friend's box, shoved in the magazine, closed the bolt. Of course, it's a control round feed, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Held that cartridge right back against the bolt face, and he pulled up, offhand, fired, boom. And of course, the 308 and the 270 chamber is just a bombshell. So the gun literally exploded. But as the gun came apart, the loophole scope bent, went up. I think it might have even broke in half. But the barrel, of course, blew out. I mean, it was a disaster. But he walked away without a scratch. And that's remarkable, because the way that Paul Mauser designed this gun was 100% to protect the shooter in the event of a catastrophic failure. Everything from a flange back here to protect from gas, last ditch effort to protect gas, escaping gas from nothing more than just a ruptured case, to of course a very strong, extremely rugged. I've run these things really hard, Mauser 98s in general. They're a favorite with big game hunters around the world, especially dangerous game where it really matters. The control round feed, to help people understand what that is, basically when you run the action and you close the bolt, it strips the round from the magazine. The case rim slips up underneath the extractor, and the bolt takes control of the cartridge. There's no way to double feed it. It just makes it an absolute reliable action. And and of course it's got a blade ejector, so you have complete control and bring it back, how hard, how fast that case gets ejected out. But everything on this design was robust. It just doesn't break. I've seen these things that have been fired, I mean, countless rounds, and just through harsh conditions, through various wars, beat the smithereens, and they just keep on working. It's a truly remarkable design. But here's where it's interesting. Almost all modern bolt actions are based off of Mauser 98 in concept, but cheapened up. The Mauser 98 is a very expensive action to make because there's so much machining on it. If the original versions had a weakness, it would be that the lock time was slow, which modern precision target shooters don't like it. I think it's running about 5 or 5.1 milliseconds. Yeah, granted, it's slow, but when it fires reliably. The second thing was, of course, the trigger was pretty rudimentary. It was not a great trigger, but it worked in military application. From a sporting standpoint, it left a little to be desired. Most early Mauser military guns, of course, had some kind of a wing safety that was not really conducive to scope use or sporting use. So this one has, of course, a sliding right-hand safety, and it's actually a three-position safety, which didn't come until later. But the Mauser 98, again, it's just a classic, iconic, rather, of rifle action as we have. Yeah, it's been copied. It's still in production today in various forms. So there you have it. There's the Mauser 98. That's my choice.
All right, Joe, what AR are you going to talk about?
Well, I'll actually mention another non-AR first. The AK-47. I think that you can't argue that the AK-47 isn't iconic.
Right.
It's been
every bad guy in every bad guy movie always has AK-47.
AK-47. Well, but you look at any. Well, and yeah, that's just it. In the movies and that, it's extremely popular. But since its introduction in late 1940s, 48 or 49, when Mr. Kalashnikov made his first version, since then about everybody in the world has tried to make one, and they're made in almost every country in the world now by different manufacturers. They've sold, and there's like the Mauser, you can't really put a number on how many have been made because there's so many people making them, but they estimate that over 150 million AK-47s have been made, making it the most made or produced gun in the
probably
world.
double that with all of the Russian and everything that we don't even know about.
China, Russia, and then it's
China,
just,
North Korea.
Who really knows?
Yeah, you just and you can't put a number on it. Just
No,
like
you
you just can't, you know. But yeah, they estimate over 150 million AK-47s have been made. And
if you want to get technical, the AK-47 was only made for a couple of years. I think it was 1947 is when it went in production. Made for a couple of years, and then it was redesigned with instead of a machine receiver, which was stamped receiver, and that's the AK-M47.
Yeah,
and that's
what everyone calls it as the AK-47.
I mean, everybody still calls it the AK-47, but it's technically the AK-M.
Yeah, so. But I mean, they're rugged and reliable.
Not super accurate generally.
Yeah, older. I mean,
nowadays
depends on
they
the
have
gun.
some that shoot pretty good.
Well, but not. But
Right.
They're not a precision gun.
They're not.
They're a combat rifle, you know.
They were designed for rugged, you know, in the mud, in the dirt, you know, beat them up, rugged, and they were
3 to 4 MOA is pretty typical for a military gun.
Yeah. So really, it's a 200 to 300 yard gun.
Yeah.
Really.
Yep.
Like in the military, you think about that. It's like, okay, 300 yards, it's hit and miss. You know, 50-50, you're going to hit somebody. So you're kind of like, that's the max range you're going to be able to really.
We actually, we went and did a little tour at a local shop here that builds AKs from parts kits. We did a video on that here almost a year ago now. It's 8 or 9 months. That was like, what, February?
Yeah.
It was early this spring, last winter, into last winter.
It was,
but go watch that. It's NGS Idaho. They're very well known in the AK world for building very quality guns. So
keeping it alive.
Keeping it alive, and you look at import rules and stuff in the USA, and it makes it hard to get a good quality AK here that's made in the US.
Right.
So it's nice that there's local companies like NGS that are putting together good quality guns out of these kits that they get. So, and they're about as genuine as you can get because it's a parts kit he's putting together. So, anyways, AKs are cool.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Well, the cartridge itself, the 7.62x39, pretty potent, especially within 200 yards. And then the Russians adopted that other cartridge in 1974, the 5.45x39, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah.
Which is also extremely potent.
It's like a 223.
Yeah,
basically.
But the bullets, at least a lot of the imported ammo that was coming in, actually performed very well on soft body tissue and muscle and stuff. They
tumble well.
They tumble well and just do all types of damage on the human body. So
yeah, I mean, there's a reason they're still in use today. They're rugged and reliable and
I sold Joe my AK. I should have kept that thing. That was actually a pretty nice AK.
Yeah, it was a Mahdi
Egyptian.
AK.
Yeah, the Egyptian. It was kind of nice. It was put together well. I should have kept the damn thing.
Yeah. As should have I.
And what would you do with it?
Shoot it.
Put it in Abby's room for her home defense. Abby comes right out with an AK with his daughter 40-round mag. Yeah, I do believe in training my daughter to actually handle a gun if the occasion calls for it.
Yeah. All right, Jake.
So my first pick, again, I try to pick things off the beaten path, and at least some things, and I don't think many people, if they came up with a list of most iconic rifles, would think of the Spencer.
It's pretty iconic.
I think so, but most of these modern
especially
influencers
for
are like,
the West, especially back in the old West, that was pretty iconic. Like,
it was revolutionary for its time.
It was way ahead of its time. That's the point.
Yeah, and so the Spencer, introduced in 1860, really didn't get made in big numbers until 1863, 1862, somewhere in there. Chambered in 2 different cartridges. There's the 5656 and the 5650. I think the 5650 was starting in 1865, and moving forward, guns were made in that caliber. Though you could shoot the 5650 in the older guns, you just wouldn't get very good accuracy. Let's see. So they were a lever action, technically gun. You still had a hammer, almost like a musket from the era, but then you had the lever here. You loaded them from the butt. You'd take out the mag tube here, dump your cartridges in. They held 7 rounds.
You'll see that in our intro.
Yeah.
Loading and using that.
Yeah.
So loading, you just kind of drop them in this way. It does hold 7. I'm just going to load 5 just so it doesn't make my ammo in my boxes kind of an odd number. These can be a little finicky with your overall length on your cartridge. These 45 Colts I'm loaded with a 250 grain round nose flat nose bullet, and length I've set at 1.57, and it seems to feed everything pretty nice. I've only got maybe 100 rounds through it so far, but I haven't had any real major bobbles with it. Sometimes they can be a little finicky with your length, but if you get it set right, it seems to feed just fine. So I just set it on half cock, and the ejection is just a little odd. I just kind of tilt it up just slightly, run the lever just smartly down and smartly back. Don't go kind of slow, otherwise it won't eject properly. But
This one's in 45.
Yeah,
Colt,
this one's
right?
a reproduction in 45 Colt. They were the first repeating metallic cartridge rifle adopted by the United States military. That alone makes it an iconic gun. And for the Civil War era, you had a gun that held 7 rounds and was actually made in pretty big numbers, especially by 1865. Especially cavalry units. It was, I think the Sharps, when you go look at the numbers of issued carbines, and by the end of the war, Sharps carbines were still number 1, but the Spencer far surpassed the Sharps in production numbers, so they were gearing up to try to re-equip all cavalry units with Spencers by 1866 if the war had gone on much longer. So, but it gave the average guy armed with the Spencer a huge advantage over somebody armed with a muzzleloader. And
Early assault rifle.
yeah.
I don't like that term, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and there's you go read on the Battle of Beecher's Island. There was, I'm trying to remember the numbers, but I think about 50 cavalrymen and scouts that were attacked by, again, depending on the source and the numbers, up to 2,000 Native Americans, Indians, and they go on an island and turn into a pretty long ordeal, siege type thing, but they fought off a number of mass charges by the Indians with Spencer carbines, and if they were armed with Sharps carbines or some type of muzzleloader or something, they wouldn't have. I don't think they would have walked away from that one. So, but the firepower was definitely an improvement over a single shot. Another interesting aspect is the 7th Cavalry was issued Spencer carbines up until like 1874, 1875. I mean, literally pretty darn close to the
Battle of the Bighorn.
Yeah, Battle of the Little Bighorn. And a lot of people are like, well, maybe if they had Spencer carbines, they would have been able to fend off the Indians and got to a hilltop and had a defensive position. But again, all that's just conjecture. So
They probably would have.
yeah,
It would have been closer at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were massively outnumbered.
They were with those
I mean,
darn, wasn't it the trap doors what they had?
yeah.
And
And
that thing was gumming up on them, and they couldn't fire fast
and it wasn't
enough.
it was that too, but they were also dropping live cartridges and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. You
Well,
know,
then
'cause-
Well,
archaeological evidence after the battle, they found that there's like 25 or 30% of the cases recovered
Misfire.
have knife marks on them. So the copper cases were sticking in the chamber, so guys had to get their knives out trying to get the case out to even reload.
yeah,
And
That really sucks.
Those were the Benet inside prime cases. They were
Yeah.
copper, and of course they knew they had a problem. In fact, this is interesting. The military knew that they had a standard operating procedure to remove the stuck case wherein you
Yeah.
take a downsize a bullet, you drop it down the
Yeah.
floor,
Yeah.
do your thing. And it's like, and the guys in the field were like, I don't have time to downsize the bullet. And they got their pocket knives out and flying the cases out.
Yeah.
But what a mess! What a disaster! And,
So the M16 wasn't the only gun that the military issued that had issues.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because of ammo.
Because of ammo.
Yeah.
Yeah, the battle of Little Bighorn would have been a completely different battle had they had something a little better.
It might have helped, but you know what? There was between 5,000 and 10,000.
I know.
Yeah, they were.
But
massive.
the other company though, they were able to just trench in and they kept the Indians at bay and kept from dying. So if Custer himself and his 7th Cavalry unit would have had Spencers that were actually freaking
Oh, it would
working,
have helped. I
think they would have completely lived.
They maybe not though. I mean, it's all conjecture. You know?
Right.
It's
It would have helped.
They might have been able to get to a position to then evacuate and get out of there. So maybe some of them might have lived, and they would have, but they wouldn't have won the battle. They would have retreated, you know.
Well, then each guy only had like what 20 rounds of 45 Colt ammo.
Yeah, something
and it's
like
like
that.
you've got to be kidding me. I'd want to have at least 200 rounds.
But for that fact alone, they wouldn't have won. They didn't have enough ammo to fend off that many Indians.
Yeah.
Well, and one positive aspect of the Spencer is there was Blakesley boxes, what they're called. They were a pouch that held these tubes that had preloaded 7 rounds of ammunition in them. So you would basically drop your gun down, pull your mag tube out, take one of those tubes out, speed load your gun, and you're back in action within a few seconds. And so that alone just makes it kind of a cool, interesting gun.
For the era.
For the era, especially.
Yeah.
I've watched a video of a guy that had an original Spencer in 5650 and a Henry rifle, and he was just doing, kind of like a speed shooting type thing, seeing how fast he could get off like 50 rounds, and using Blakesley's tubes, he was able to actually catch up to the Henry's rate of fire within 50 or 60 rounds or whatever it was, just because of the speed of reloading. So
to be clear, too, the Spencer does not self-cock. So you actually, in my experience, the best way to run one fast is to shoot, and of course, cock the hammer chamber, and then just go right to the shoulder and shoot again.
Yeah.
And so whereas the Henry, as Jake is referring to, you're in the action, of course, it cocks the hammer, and you're good for your next shot. So so he was talking about this. The reload aspect is able to narrow that time down a lot. So
yeah. And the cartridge itself, ballistically, you're shooting I'm trying to remember, I think it was a 350 grain bullet, and it was going 1,200 feet a second, somewhere around that. Somewhere around there, and it's like, well, that's honestly kind of a fairly potent cartridge.
Oh boy,
really. So
you get hit with a 50 cal with that velocity, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
it's over.
Yeah. So, and there was numerous instances in the Civil War where Spencers really showed their numbers, even if they weren't in that particular battle in big numbers, just to the engagement and the firepower advantage really gave the Yankees a certain advantage in that regard. So anyways, that's my number 1 pick.
Mm-hmm. All right, my number 1 pick. It's not technically the Mini 14, but it's a derivative. So,
wait, it is the Mini.
Well, it is.
Oh.
No. I was going to pick the M1 Garand, but the Mini 14 is kind of derivative of that. The same style action and everything, just a few features that are upgraded. But the M1 Garand, I think, Jake had his, but his is torn apart right now. We'll try to get something fixed on it. Anyway, so I was going to pick the M1 Garand. It's pretty iconic. It's pretty historically significant. World War II, it really didn't see that long of service overall in its own right, but what service it did do, it was a very iconic, historically significant gun. And then after that, they came out with the M14, or and then they, Mini 14, just kind of different derivatives of the M1 Garand, but it's all, goes back to that M1 Garand.
You got M1A.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of.
Nowadays, lots of options for kind of that action style.
Yeah. So it's very historically accurate, iconic gun. and then also the iconic M1 Garand ding when when you get empty, you know, it kicks out your
Triple clip.
your stripper clip. Yeah.
In block clip.
Yeah.
Yeah. The M1 Garand was adopted in 1936. I think mid 50s is when it was replaced. 55, 56, something like that.
So it had almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years, which honestly is
That's pretty
good
long.
run.
yeah. And it was the first standard issue service. Well, trying to think how to say this. It was the first officially adopted semi-automatic service rifle that was going to replace bolt action. So that gave the Americans a huge advantage in World War II.
Yeah, 8 rounds per stripper.
Yeah, and there's other countries had semi-automatic rifles. The Russians had their SVT-40, but they were never issued in huge numbers. The M1 Garand was, especially by the end of the war, was virtually equipping every American soldier, you know, with either an M1 Garand or an M1 carbine or of some type. So
It was definitely an advanced battle weapon. In other words, it was rugged. It was heavy.
It makes you
recoil was
wonder
modest.
if we didn't have that 30-06 in a 8-round stripper clip semi-auto, how would have World War II fully turned out? You know, because a 30-06, 500 or 600 yards, that's pretty easy, you know, to keep someone at bay and everything. And you got it semi-auto. It's like, you know, that's a pretty potent round in and of itself.
yeah,
But
and reload time was quick.
yeah, very
Yeah.
fast. And
the British actually did a test in the post-war years where they were doing a test with an M1 Garand and a magazine rifle, so, you know, just showing reload speeds. And using an N-block clip, an M1 Garand can be reloaded like, I mean, it was a pretty significant advantage in reload speed.
when you're practiced up and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really actually really fast. So with a magazine rifle, you have to, you know, take the magazine out, fish your new magazine out, insert it, and then run the action. The M1 Garand, you don't have to do all those steps.
shove
It
it in
already
there.
ejects your clips. You just grab a new clip, shove it in, and you're good to go again. So
Well, and the protruding magazine at different times in the field can be in the way. Sometimes shooting prone, it can be too long, or you know, interfere with the Garand is flush on the bottom, and
yeah,
But yeah, very, very good gun. I need to get myself in M1 Garand, but you know, I don't know. They're kind of
They're cool.
finicky. They're kind of finicky on hand loading the ammunition and everything, and
well,
I mean, I
not
can
really.
do
The
it.
main thing is you just have to use the correct window of powder charge and
Yeah.
gas volume.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you bend the operating rod and so on.
yeah, that's what I mean. It's kind of finicky, so you kind of have to know what you're doing. You can't just throw together a load and say, "All right, we're good to go." So, anyways, all right, Dad.
What's your second?
Well, of course, the Mauser 98 was, of course, of European design and descent. That brings us to more modern U.S. And this, I'm going with the pre-64 Winchester Model 70. I'm not going to include comments on the post-64 because that's a very up and down history, if you know what I'm saying. So we're just going to focus on the pre-64 for right now. But I'm gonna joke with this next comment. So how many of you, by a show of hands, I'm joking, are familiar with the Winchester Model 51? Probably not many. There was only 24 of them produced. I've only seen one. I've been in the gun industry a long time. I've only seen one, but it was a really significant rifle because Winchester had been, of course, producing arms for the military and so forth, and decided in 1918 to begin to offer a bolt action rifle. And I'm not going to get into too much of the design of it, but it was they were only expecting to build a couple of hundred a year, and they wanted it to be a very, very high-end rifle, something to compete with the very best of Europe's finest good gun builders and so on. Of course, there was a control round feed action. They wanted takedown options available. They wanted it with a scope and aperture sight. I mean, the list of options were endless, and they had 4 built in the gunsmith shop and 20 in the model shop or custom shop, I guess basically is what it was at the time. So there's only 24 of them made. What's interesting is that there was at least 2, but probably at least 5 or 6 of those built in 27 caliber, which was actually the 270 Winchester. You're saying, but wait a minute, the 270 Winchester wasn't introduced until 1925. So as we make this video, the 270 is celebrating its 100th birthday. You're right, but you know what? Winchester brass, and I'm not going to go into the story too great here, decided that bolt actions were quote and unquote folly and frivolous and other things, and they wanted to focus on lever guns. Well, the American soldier returning from war had already been introduced to the bolt action rifle with the 03 Springfield and so forth, and the Enfield, and they wanted it in sporting guns. Well, Remington had been building Enfields, and they took and basically evolved that into the Model 30. So Winchester decided, no, bolt guns is not the way of the future, and they scrapped the Model 51. And so meanwhile, Remington goes ahead and makes the Model 30. They were also tooled up to build that bolt action for the military, but it was so expensive to build, and Remington was losing money on every gun they built. Well, suddenly, when the Remington 30, at least it sold. You know, sportsmen wanted it, and it wasn't priced terribly high, but they wanted it. So Winchester looked at this, and a few years later, they realized, wait a minute, we made a mistake. There is demand for bolt guns. So they began development of the Model 54. Jake was kind enough to throw in his 54 carbine in 30-06 for me. And this was first offered in 1925. It actually sold pretty good, but it had some design shortcomings, if you will. And at a glance, if people look at it, they'll think they're looking at a Winchester Model 70 pre-64, but it is the Model 54. And of course, it was chambered in 270, 6, and a couple of others. But that's really a slick little rifle. A friend of Jake's, actually a friend of ours from Oklahoma, owned that rifle, and Jake swapped him out of it, and cool rifle. But this brings us to the Model 70. So the Model 70 was introduced technically in 1935. They built a few. Really, it got going in 1936. Some sources say 37, but we're going to call it 1936. So, and of course, one comment about 54, that's where the 270 Winchester was formally introduced in 1925 with the Model 54. So by 1936 or so, they had the Model 70 underway, and it was really like an instant classic. It had all the right features. The trigger had been improved substantially. It had a 3-position safety. The early guns actually had a little different safety than most that you're going to be familiar with. This is a post-war gun, by the way. And of course, the post-war had a 3-position wing safety. The concept was with a scope that you could hold your fingers and control that safety very silently, or you can run it with just the thumb and make noise and go forward with it in such a manner. But it was just a very rugged, reliable action. It was really based on the Mauser 98. Some real purists will look at it and say, well, it didn't protect you as good from gases and so forth. And it's like, well, that was a weakness. That is true. But the rest of the gun was incredibly rugged and tough. I mean, the action was just bulletproof. But its downfall was it was expensive to make. So they discontinued kind of briefly during World War II, and then of course the post-war version came back. But what's interesting is they only built one receiver size for everything from 22 Hornet to 375 H&H. So they would basically put blocks in for shorter cartridges. They'd mill out a little bit at the receiver ring and at the breech or at the rear bridge for longer cartridges like the 300 and 375 H&H. And it was a no-nonsense gun. They had true match barrels on them. These guns were incredibly good shooters. They were of course control round feed, and they really were kind of a derivative of the Mauser 98, but American made, but set up the way a sportsman want them. They had a hinge floor plate. Some complained that the latch was too stiff to release it, but you know what? There's nothing worse than to be facing a dangerous game, a brown bear in the brush, which I've actually seen happen, wherein a floor plate that's not secured correctly, you're shooting, boom, and all of a sudden that floor plate pops open and all your cartridges land on the ground. It's not great when that happens. So, and I've actually known guys that duct tape and done other things to keep floor plates shut. So the Model 70, it stayed closed. They had anti-bind built onto the bolt body. They had, of course, control round feet. I mentioned it had the claw extractor, but the claw extractor, one advantage over the Mauser was that it was beveled, so that meant you could drop around directly in the chamber and still chamber, but you still had the advantage with the Mauser. You had to strip them from the magazine. So, but the Model 70, of course, you could do both. I mean, it was a full control round feed. It became a legend. It really did. It was an interesting era, but also it served as the platform to introduce such cartridges as the 243, the 308, and the 358. It also was, and don't get confused on my terminology here, but it was the platform for the first short magnums. And what I mean by that is the 264 Win Mag, the 338 Win Mag, and 458, and of course the last one of that group was the 300 Winchester Magnum. Those are technically all short actions because they would fit in a 30-06 length action, 3.340 inches, versus previously like the 300 Weatherby or the 300 H&H or 375, they all required a 3.6 inch length action. So those were modern cartridges being developed in the Model 70. And this is of course a 338. Old hunting rifle, but they were great guns. They were just no nonsense rugged. A couple of things real brief, so I don't want to take up too much time, but they had a trigger design that was still incredible. And unfortunately the modern Model 70s, the latest, do not have it. They're housed triggers, but the trigger was very simple, very rugged. It didn't break, it didn't foul up. I remember one time hunting brown bears, going down in quicksand with my rifle, and so we're near a river. I disassembled the rifle basically into field position, or field strip, if you will, and weighed out in the river. Of course, got hip waders on and so forth, and disassembled the rifle right there basically, and I wash out all that quicksand out of the rifle, clean out the sand out of the bolt, out of the trigger, wash it all out, shake everything off and run a patch through the bore, and I was good to go. The rifle continued to work. Took a nice brown bear, and they're housed triggers. You cannot do that. With a housed trigger with silt and sand in them, they're done. Your rifle will not cock. It won't stay cocked, and you better have another rifle, because it's done until you can get home and either clean that trigger mechanism, and housed triggers are very intricate internally. You got to pull that thing apart or replace it. So, but this was really a no-nonsense rugged rifle. So, a couple of things too, briefly. No, I'll quit. Your turn,
all right,
Joe.
Dad'll do a full in-depth video on that.
That was the full in-depth video.
If you haven't noticed, Dad gets a little long-winded sometimes. We get all of us get over here, take a nap, and we got, is it my turn yet?
I'm quiet by nature, trust me.
So, of course, I have to talk about the AR-15 as being iconic. It was designed in the late 1950s. Officially, the contract was officially given to Colt to produce the military guns in the early 60s. And the M16 was that first variant for the military use. And since then, it's been in use by the military in a number of different configurations. Civilian market, it became known as the AR-15, which is a semi-auto only gun, whereas the military guns were select fire. Now the AR-15 is kind of similar to the 1911 in that it became so popular that about everybody under the sun started making them. And there's good ones and there's bad ones. They're not all created equal. Of course, in the military in Vietnam, and that they had a lot of issues with them, mostly ammo-related issues. You really nowadays there's a lot of good manufacturers, like I said, but there are also a lot of bad manufacturers, and you get bad guns here and there. But the AR-15 really is a versatile gun in that you can do pretty much anything with it you need, whether it's hunting, deer and small game with, to self-defense and self-protection. And they're versatile, like I said, if you get a good one, extremely reliable. And parts are everywhere, and they're easy to work on, simple to work on. Yeah, I mean, they're just a really iconic gun. They're still obviously in use today with the M4 and the Mark 18, Mark 12, all the different variants they've got. But yeah, ultra iconic gun. I think that's probably one of my favorite military times in Vietnam, with the guys marching around in the jungle with their M16s or their XM177s. Just kind of a neat iconic moment to me. So, yep. I have a full video out on AR-15s and kind of quality, so go watch that if you haven't watched it yet. But I kind of get into more detail on good versus bad. So
yeah.
All right.
Well, I guess it's probably no surprise I'm talking about the Winchester 73 again. This seems to make my list every time we do one of these types of videos, you know. So, the Winchester 73 was honestly, this was probably Winchester's flagship gun for quite a few decades, and this was what really, this gun here in particular, the 1873, really kind of put Winchester on the map and really built the Winchester name, reputation, and the Winchester empire, you know. So, going back to the Winchester history, there was the 1860 Henry, which evolved into the Winchester repeating arms. They made some changes to the Henry design, added an actual fore-end, wood fore-end, instead just blued steel there. I mean, just the...
Well, they had no form. They just had a magazine that was fit to go with the barrel.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, they added the loading gate. And that was the 1866 Yellow Boy is what it's called. Still in the same original 44 Henry rimfire cartridge. The 1873 was an improvement over that because it had a steel receiver, still had the loading gate and the forearm and stuff. They added a dust cover up here, but the caliber is what really set this apart. They offered these in 3840, 4440, 3220. 4440 was probably the most popular.
It was first.
Yeah,
it came out first.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was. What was significant about it, Jake, is that the 44 rimfire in the 66, if I remember right, it held the max load was about 26 or 28 grains of black with it.
Yeah.
Whereas the 4440, they got a full 40 grain charge with it. So it was a pretty substantial power improvement.
Yes.
So,
yes. And of course, this remained popular with Winchester from 1873. They stopped production in the 19-teens. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look. Because in 1892, of course, there was the 92 Winchester, a John Browning design. It was a more efficiently sized lever action rifle, still chambered in the same cartridges, and it had a stronger action and whatnot. But they kind of stopped production of the 73 in the 19-teens sometime. I'd have to go back and look at the exact date in favor of the 92. But these remain popular still, you know, through the pre-war years. Throughout the Wild West, too, these were incredibly popular. Very reliable guns. I don't know if there's a more iconic Old West photo than the one of Billy the Kid with his 73 Winchester carbine.
My grandfather, Joe Pierce, was an Arizona Ranger, and he grew up on the frontier in Arizona in the 1870s, and he made a comment in his writings that when he got his first Winchester 73 and 4440, he said that was a very difficult rifle to get on the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people sought them heavily. They searched them out. They paid premiums for them. They're very desirable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Winchester made a lot of them. I didn't look up the numbers before the video. I should have. They made a lot of these. They were I mean, yeah, they were really the Winchester to have. They made a larger version of this and bigger calibers. Those never really were as popular. Those were the 1876 Winchester.
They call it the centennial, meaning 100 years since the country had been born.
Yes, yeah. And then also movies. I don't know if there's not very many movies that are made that were really kind of based off the story of a gun, and that there was the Winchester 73, I think is the title of the movie, starring Jimmy Stewart, and I mean, it really kind of follows the life of a rifle, you know, and it's kind of a cool movie. So that's my pick for an iconic rifle. So
yeah, I got a comment. You know, Buffalo Bill, he was the top showman of that era. He was world renowned and had been an Army Scout and among other, you know, incredible history before he became a showman. And it remained his favorite rifle even after the Browning designs came out. So, kind of interesting.
All right, me.
Yep.
All right. Last and final pick. All right. So you're gonna wonder why I have a stinking old Savage here, so to speak. But you know, when you really think about it, this is kind of one of those guns that Savage, well, just Savage in general, what they did really changed the firearms industry in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is they were kind of the first, I mean, not necessarily the first, but they really capitalized on the aspect of a very highly accurate rifle at a working man's price. That was kind of what gave Savage their edge on everyone else, all their other competitors. You know, you had Ruger, Winchester, Remington, so on and so forth. Savage came in and said, okay, we got to build a rifle that's highly accurate and as cheap as possible, so the average guy that wants to go out and shoot deer, coyotes, elk, whatever it is, they can afford it. They can buy several different guns at that point because they're not tied down with being so darned expensive that they can't afford it. And that's what Savage did. They sat down and, yeah, the action is very simple. You know, it's not a very rugged action or anything else, but it's very simple and easy to produce and cheap. And they put on a better quality barrel, you know, so you get better accuracy. And then they did a really good job on their triggers. And so, you know, that's why I chose this as one of my guns, because I got, you know, over the years I've owned probably 10 different Savages, but right now I got 3 or 4. One of them I burned the barrel out on shooting coyotes and ground squirrels and everything else under the sun. It's my 22-250. I got it when I was 16, I think I was, or 15. And I burned the barrel out. It doesn't shoot anymore, so I need to get a new barrel put on it. But, you know, it's very, you know, I think it's a very historically significant or iconic gun from that standpoint.
You know, I might inject a couple of thoughts on that. It has some real distinction in that it was made it was first offered in 1957, and almost immediately offered in left hand, meaning that and it was the first readily available commercially produced on a mass scale to be left-handed. So that was kind of significant. The other thing is that actually makes it an older rifle that's been in continuous production than the Remington 700 and the Winchester Model 70 as well, because when Winchester closed shop in New Haven, Connecticut in 2005, 2006, they had to shut down for 3 years. So it was that's kind of significant. A couple of things too I was going to mention is that if you look just forward to the receiver, the barrel mount, and with a very minimal tool, somebody at home can change the barrels on this. So do a switch caliber, if you will.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So this one's a Model 10. You know, they have Model 11, so on and so forth, and each version I think is pretty much same of itself, just little tiny changes here and there.
Yeah.
That changes the
110 models. And all its derivatives. You know, the submodels include like the 11 and 111, and the 16 and the 116, with long and short actions. I think there's a 14 in there as well. Anyway, yeah, they're all based on the 110.
Yeah.
The they came out with the trick. You mentioned the trigger, and that was really kind of important because
The Accu trigger.
yeah, the
They came
Accu
out with
trigger
yeah.
that was first offered in 2002,
Right.
and you've had a gun that had a very simple design trigger. Which the more I'm around guns, I love simple designs. Simplicity wins in reliability almost always.
Right.
And it's a very simple trigger, but it's right out of the box a very good trigger.
Well, and look at it like this. How long did it take all the other companies to catch up to the idea of a highly accurate rifle at a working man's price? You know,
Well,
I mean, it took all the other gun companies quite a while to really catch on to that. You
Yes,
know?
but you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you on that part, but you got to understand, like the Model 70. Okay, they started with a 120 ounce receiver,
Right.
and they machined it down in rough numbers to 19 ounces. That was a tremendous amount of machining, so it was very expensive.
That's what I mean.
Well,
but
no, just let me finish. So when Remington had come out of what they called their modernization reconversion program after the war, they began at that time with the round bar stock, and that's what Savage did too. So Remington was ahead of them in that sense. But Savage took a step further by having modular parts, meaning that like the Winchester bolt is all one piece, including the handle. It wasn't even brazed on. The Savage, of course, all that's all those are parts and pieces married together. So they and I'm not putting it down, but it was engineered early to be inexpensive to make, and so. But no, they were really good rifles. Years ago, I went through the plant. Now, something you know that going back in time, Savage really began focusing on that in the late 80s.
Right.
Yeah, superb accuracy, and I'll do a video on Savage one of these days. I have actually been to the factory as a guest, for days, where I built my own rifle and so forth. So anyway, we'll talk about that another day.
Yeah.
But that's a great rifle.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, it's been a long one. Thanks for staying with us. Check out our other videos, and we'll see you next time.